Ladies and gentlemen, I am SidAlpha. I know that it has been an exceptionally long amount of time since my last video, and there are a couple of reasons for that. As you are all well aware, there is a certain worldwide health concern that I don't dare refer to by name lest I get struck down by the almighty algorithm, and as such it shall henceforth be referred to as the incident. Now, the incident has caused a massive uptick in work required by my day job as we have been flooded with requests from businesses for remote worker configurations, and our company has not only been handling these setups for our existing client base, we've also been offering free labor on these setups for nonprofits such as women's shelters and the like. In addition to that, I was recently exposed to the incident and I have been forced to self-quarantine, and unfortunately it appears I did manage to catch something. However, testing for the incident within at least a 100-mile radius is limited to individuals who are being forced to be hospitalized, and even then, there's an 18-day backlog on testing results. So whether or not I'd come down with a mild case of the incident, it was still enough to destroy me for the better part of a week. Nevertheless, I'm back and my own backlog of content has grown to gigantic proportions. So I decided today that I would focus on providing context and awareness to a situation that was brought to my attention by a viewer and smaller YouTuber regarding Thomas Mahler of Moon Studios, the developers of Ori and the Will of the Wisps, in which Mahler has been accused by this YouTuber of pressuring a review website to update a low review score of the game and of the website itself acceding to his wishes. Now, right up front, I will tell you that there is no review manipulation taking place here, no improper coercion. However, this does present an interesting example of what can happen when some things are taken out of context and why I feel that it is necessary for some people to unclench just a little bit. Also, the video footage you will be seeing in this comes from the YouTube channel ElAnistaDeBits, a channel that has released a great deal of game performance comparison videos, and a link to that channel will be down in the description below. So first, let's take a look at the situation itself. Now, this started from the website PowerUpGaming.com and their review titled Ori and the Will of the Wisps Review Xbox One, Wisp You Were Here. And you will note within the review itself that the writer has updated the review, stating, with update version, the technical issues mentioned later in this review have been alleviated. The review and score have been updated accordingly. Now, there are no web archives of the review available prior to the updates. However, the writer, Leo Stevenson, chose instead to simply remove or rewrite segments of the review entirely, crossing off segments of the review discussing the technical issues within the game that were resolved by the Day 1 patch. Those issues included textures and elements failing to load, audio for the game periodically ceasing completely, large frame rate issues, and failure to save. And the final updated review score given by PowerUp is a 9.1 out of 10. Conversely, the original review score given by the website was a 7.7 out of 10. And the justification I was provided for the accusation of review coercion or manipulation was this statement made by Thomas Mahler on Reset Era. In it, he quotes the PowerUp reviewer saying, "I can only review what I played. I'm not going to pretend I didn't have to replay huge sections because the game didn't save, nor am I going to ignore the frame rate issues or everything else. Day 1 patches are fine, but it's not my experience and I can't review what might happen." To which Mahler responded, "Well, the Day 1 patch is online, so would you mind updating your review based on that? As is, your review is critiquing a version that the general public will never see. I get that press want to do this stuff on principle, but since no gamer out there will ever see any issues you've noticed, you don't think it's fair to at least update your score if you've rated it lowly due to the technical issues?" To which the PowerUp reviewer responded that he would be more than happy to, also stating that 5 hours prior, the Day 1 patch was still not available in Australia. And due to these comments, this is what the YouTuber in question had to say.
The game director at Moon Studios for the new Ori game on the Xbox and PC is pressuring a review site to re-review the game because it went to them broken. It is broken on the disc. It requires the Day 1 patch that drastically changes the game, which I did an earlier video on that, drastically changes the presentation of the game and performance and everything, and fixes a ton of bugs. But what if somebody can't get that patch? What if somebody goes to the store and buys a game on a disc, which most people who buy physically don't like to do a lot of downloads and stuff like that, and the game is broken? It's a completely different game, broken, right as you put it in and install it to your Xbox or PlayStation or whatever. This shit needs to stop. The games need to come on disc as fixed as possible out of the gate. They need to go reviewers as fixed as possible. The same experience that someone's going to get putting that disc into their system needs to be reviewed. And sadly, the website changed the score. It was a 7.7 or something like that, and they changed it to a 9.1, thanks to the pressure from this developer.
Now, obviously, the power-up reviewer was playing an embargoed press release version of the game and as such did not benefit from the Day 1 patch that resolved numerous issues. In fact, the vast majority, if not all of the technical issues he faced were resolved with that Day 1 patch. But I'm a little concerned that these communications, which seemed perfectly amicable and non-forceful in nature, were being framed and presented to me as pressuring the reviewer into updating their critique. And the reviewer was absolutely correct in another statement made on that thread where he states that he can only review what was played, and he is also correct that he cannot update a review based solely on the concept of what the game might look like down the road. Now, given that statement about what might be available down the road was due to the Day 1 patch apparently not being visible to players in Australia at that point in time. Now, I'm aware that there will be several people wondering, why am I even making this video? It's relatively a non-issue. No major headlines about this, nothing really except a smaller YouTuber angry over the review score being changed and his impression that it was done so specifically due to unethical pressures placed on the writer by one of the game's developers. But to my mind, this sort of thing is very important for one specific reason. Now, I will not be mentioning the YouTuber who contacted me, nor will I be linking his channel, as I don't wish to flood the guy with negative feedback, as does tend to happen despite my best efforts to dissuade people from such actions. But within his video, the core focus of his anger and frustration over this centers over the concept that when one purchases a physical copy of a game, it should be the most complete version possible, as well as any reviewer should be playing the most complete version of the game as possible. And in that, he is absolutely correct, and I do agree, to an extent. Now, I say to an extent because his critique of the developer's actions and the acquiescence of the reviewer takes place within a bubble and lacks any nuance of context or understanding of the potential situation. The reviewer was basing his article on a pre-release copy. We know this. We also know that the Day 1 patch didn't come out until Day 1. Now, in that, it is also very likely that the Day 1 patch wasn't even finished and ready to release until, well, Day 1. Another lack of context and understanding is that Moon Studios had a publisher for the game, Xbox Game Studios. And as we all know, when it comes to publishers and their advertising, developers are kept to fairly firm deadlines in terms of completing the game. Marketing budgets and their timelines are assigned well in advance of the game's release date in order for the best possible pricing for the advertising can be obtained, and if a deadline needs to be pushed back, it must be weighed against the success and failure of a game along with the cost to modify the marketing campaign. Sometimes a delay is warranted, as the cost of pushing back the marketing will cause less of a financial hit than the potential in lost sales due to poor review scores. Sometimes, say in the case of Ori and the Will of the Wisps, a Day 1 patch can be pushed out and the game can be made to be stable and playable enough to not greatly impact review scores. This sort of thing is irritating to no end, but it is an unfortunate reality of the games industry, and gamer pressures have not yet reached a point to cause a shift in that regard. So, owing to that unfortunate reality, we're left with a reviewer who ended up being forced to play a substandard version of the game, and his original review score reflected that. Moon Studios released a Day 1 patch that resolved the majority of the issues the developer faced, and as such, one of the developers asked, as they tend to do, if the reviewer would be willing to update his review to better reflect the state of the game that most gamers would see on the day of launch. The developer was not in the wrong to do so, nor was the reviewer at PowerUp wrong to adjust his review. The developers want to see their game reviewed well, and it is not uncommon to see a developer ask a critic to update their review. I myself have been approached over a dozen times over the years by developers asking that very same thing, and my thoughts on that are rather mixed. In one specific instance, I had reviewed an indie game and I gave it a fair amount of praise, rather enjoying what was on offer, only to have the developers come back to me sometime later and demanding I either modify my video or take it down entirely and create a new one, owing to the fact that they had released numerous updates since then and the review no longer represented the current state of the game. That was, to my mind, a ridiculous request to make, as several months had gone by, and I denied them their request in no uncertain terms, because it is not the critic's job to be beholden to the developers, nor is it the critic's job to maintain a process of constantly updating their reviews based on patches completed weeks or even months after the fact. If a developer wishes a review to better reflect the state of their game, then they should have put more effort into the game at launch. Now, there have also been other times where a developer asked for a review to be updated as they had released a massive update. Usually that occurred within the first week, and in those circumstances, I did release an updated video and I felt the situation warranted it. These are situations that require sound judgment on the part of the reviewer, and in this particular case, I feel that the power-up reviewer did the responsible thing in modifying his review, as this is a day one patch and his original article would not represent what players would actually be seeing. This isn't a situation regarding microtransactions or any form of monetization being spirited away from critics in a bait-and-switch process engaged in by the developers. It is nothing more than a patch that resolves a metric ton of issues. But what our anonymous YouTuber did was he allowed his fervor for games to actually be completed before they are released, a sentiment that I actually share, to thoroughly color his impression of these interactions and caused him to directly claim that there was coercion taking place and that the reviewer damaged his own credibility by adjusting his review score, when in reality, the situation is simply the developer doing his job and the reviewer doing his. This misrepresentation can potentially harm both the developer and the reviewer, and it also does a disservice to the YouTuber's own viewer base. Not all critique is created equal, and in this situation, I felt it warranted not necessarily a call-out, but at the very least some proper critique and understanding, albeit in an exceptionally long-winded manner, of this situation. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, I am SidAlpha, and I'll see you next time.